We are on live, and I'm gonna hit the cue right after these next once it's loading. Okay, we're on live. We are on. Perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to We Could Be Wrong, but who cares? I'm Anderson.
This is Christopher Harris.
This is Kevin.
I'm John.
And Mike.
Welcome, everyone, to another show of We Could Be Wrong. Thank you, viewers on Instagram and on YouTube. Please continue to come and watch us. And don't forget to email us at mysocketproductions@gmail.com. That's mysocketproductions@gmail.com. Quick word from for our new show, Just the Facts, hosted by Sean Frost. Just the Facts is the after show for this show, and that will have its own email as well as its own pictures. And look forward to the first episode this coming week. Thank you very much. Welcome, team. Welcome, guys. As you guys know from last week, we wanted both of our topics were about Russia, Ukraine, and our other topic was about Trudeau, Canada, and the events that are happening there. We will start with Russia and the Ukraine. I would like to open this up because two of our conservative side could not make it this week. We do have John, and I don't want another thing of last week where it seemed like everyone was pushing John into a corner, but I would like to open it up with John because I know that John has intellectual, great, strong thoughts. John, the floor is yours. Thank you.
What aspect would you want to start with?
Oh, well, just the fact of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine and your feelings about it, where you stand about it, and how you interpret the actions that's happening and what should be America's involvement in it. That's a lot of words. Sorry for making it so long.
So right off the bat, let me just say that the people of Ukraine have a lot of heart. There is obviously a massive amount against them, but I was watching videos of the men basically sending their families out to Hungary or Poland or things like that, and then basically getting in line to go get guns that they may or may not have ever used before in order to fight back and try to keep their country out of Russian hands. And I will tell you, for what they have and the armament that they have, they are doing a phenomenal job. Russia really done whatever it thought it was going to do, they would have had the entire country under by now. And those guys are still holding on. They're still fighting that guerrilla warfare. The president, the parliament stayed behind. They didn't get out and leave like we've seen in other countries. They're still there fighting. So whatever encouragement that we can give to those folks and salute the bravery that they're showing, I think that should be the very first thing that we talk about and say.
Here, here.
Man, I mean, those videos are heartbreaking, but man, that's a lot of bravery. As far as what America's involvement should be now, or are you wanting to go back and see what America's involvement was beforehand?
You know what? What should America's involvement be now? And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I've been getting a lot of mixed signals. Not that you speak for or you condone anything Tucker Carlson says, or even the senator from, Wisconsin, and some of the things I've been hearing from some of the right that I felt has been real mixed signals. I'm not saying you represent them or you speak for them, but I would like to hear your perspective of what America's involvement should be now.
Sure. I can give you 5 steps that I think that we should absolutely do right this very second. So the very first thing, number one, is do everything we can to ban all Russian petroleum and natural gas sales in America, and then work with the other countries in order to do the same thing. The majority, and I want to say it's 60%, although I'm not 100% sure about that, but the majority of Russia's economy is based on energy sales of petroleum and natural gas.
That's correct.
If you take that out, that eliminates the amount of money that they can spend on the war, that eliminates what they can pay their soldiers, how they can buy armament, how they can produce, all those type of things. If you can take the purse away, you can do amazing damage to it. Number two, you should remove all the Russian diplomats from the United States. You should kick every single one of them out. You should kick the ambassador out, and you should also seize every one of their holdings. Those are foreign citizens. They're not US citizens. They're not available for the same protections that we should have. So things like their property, like their apartments, their homes, their stocks, their bonds, all of their holdings in the United States should immediately be seized and put on hold. Number three, we should be working to remove remove Russia completely from SWIFT, not just taking little pieces here and there, which is what we've been doing. We're putting sanctions on, we're going to put a sanction on this bank, or we're going to do this, or they're going to do that. Remove them from SWIFT, which would take a massive amount of effort, because we're not the only ones that has a say in that. That's something that has to come from a lot of countries, and Russia owes several countries a lot of money. And by taking them out of SWIFT, you're basically saying, okay, we're not going to get paid whatever they owe us. And that's a big, 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 big step. That would take a massive amount of deal making to do, but it would, again, cut the money out from them. They can't pay their soldiers. They can't buy bullets. They can't do a lot in the war. Number four, get a no-fly zone over Ukraine. If you can set up a UN authorized no-fly zone over there, that's the biggest strategical advantage that Russia has over Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't have a massive air force. They don't have pilots like the United States and Russia and China. They don't have this big thing where they can defend that. So these bombers that are coming in from Russia that are targeting these places and just taking out massive amounts of the Ukraine, and especially based on what the president of Ukraine was saying, where they're bombing a lot of civs, that's a big issue. You take that out, you give the Ukrainians a massive step up in a war, because now it has to be ground to ground. Now they have to go in there soldier by soldier and take it house by house. They can't just run in there and bomb the hell out of everything and try to demoralize everybody. And the last thing is, we got to work on these countries that are helping Russia get around sanctions. So for example, like India, we pissed off India. I completely understand that, and we don't have to go into all the things about that. But we pissed off India, and India is helping Russia getting around the sanctions. So is China, although I think China is a lost cause. We're not going to be able to do really a lot with them. But some of these other countries that are funneling money, that are helping them produce sales, having supplies shipped into their country, and then their country is shipping them out to other parts of the world, cut off money, cut off a supply chain. That's a big thing. Those are 5 things we can do, we can work towards. Some of those we can do right this second. But we can do that. We don't have to put a soldier on the ground. We can cut the legs out from under these people just by those things.
You know what, John?
You know what? Can I go around right now? I would like to ask John. It will be my honor to be your campaign manager when you run for Senate.
You know what? You
because
really put me in the bad spot.
Because I don't know who is Biden talking to, but we need John up there in the Biden administration.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I mean, Anderson made it funny, but the truth is, John does not have a political standing right now, but he's made some of the most sense that I've heard from a lot of these political people, and on American television right now. And it shocks me that everyday people like John can make just this much sense, and our political leaders that we elect make 0 to none and throw stones at their political rivals that make proper sense, like this gentleman did.
But why is that? But why is that happening? Like I just don't get it.
John, can you answer that? I mean, since you're giving all the great answers all of a sudden, can you answer that? Like, what is like?
Or do you see? Or it's a better question for John is: do you hear the same from what you're saying? Like, do you hear your friends saying the same thing you're saying? Do they agree with you, or do they disagree with what you're saying?
Terrific question, Anderson.
Both.
Okay.
I think there's people on both sides that want to send soldiers over there. We just sent another 7,000. I think it was last Wednesday over to Hungary. And honestly, there's a lot of things that there's a lot of things that I would do before sending soldiers over there.
Let
And
me ask
I
you
don't necessarily see us having to do those things when we can do other things. We have amazing lessons from the past of what we did with Russia, what we did with China, what we did with Cuba, what we did with other places where we did send soldiers and where we didn't send soldiers, and what the repercussions of each of those were. And if we can just learn from history, that is one of the most important things that we can do.
Sean, how are you making absolutely stunning sense without throwing stones to a political party you don't agree with?
So you asked me what our involvement was now, so I focused completely on now. You didn't ask me how we got here, because if you'd asked me how we got here, I would have tried to
Okay.
word things a different way.
Okay.
Some stones may have been thrown.
Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
Either
don't want
way,
to
I
get
would
in this
have.
trap again.
So here's the thing. Either way, I would have told you what I honestly believe.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
And
let's
that's
hold off on that. You know, that's part B. Okay, can we do that as part B?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead,
Sure.
Mike.
Give everybody a chance to respond to part A.
Okay. Yeah.
Go ahead, Kevin. You got something to say? Go ahead. I'll go last.
Oh, I mean, I'm not really sure how the sides are kind of getting set up. I mean, what's happening right now is Russia is there was a NATO agreement, as far as I understand, that was in place, and Ukraine wasn't supposed to join NATO under this agreement. And there was a bunch of attempts through like the EU to give them sort of, partial status that kind of inflamed all these things. And I mean, I don't know if we're not going back, if part A is what should our involvement be now? I mean, my opinion is always last resort and zero involvement. I really don't care if Russia owns Ukraine, personally.
Oh wow. Okay.
Mike, can you respond to that last statement?
I didn't see that
Well,
coming.
Well, Kevin, you said it. We do. We have an agreement. We have an alliance with these countries. Okay, it's an alliance that's been set up to basically defend Europe. I mean, it's old school. It's based on Cold War, but it's still an alliance that's in place.
Yeah, but Ukraine's not part of that, and they're not supposed to be a part of that. That's like in the agreement, they're not allowed to join because they border Russia.
Correct. But the issue then is, where is Putin going to stop? Because Poland and the Baltic countries and several other countries are right next to Ukraine. So what's going to make him stop there? So Biden didn't send troops to Ukraine. He sent troops to the NATO countries to basically say, hey, man, you're not going any further here. That's
we all have a responsibility to protect the NATO countries. That's like the whole reason that it's set up.
Okay, well, what your last statement there at the end though was like, as far as you're concerned, I don't care. Well,
yes.
That's why I think America.
Ukraine is not a NATO country, so like there's a distinction there.
Correct. Okay, yeah, but it's an issue of how far do we let Putin go? He took, in what was it, 2008? He took over Crimea. 2014.
Yeah,
he took over Crimea.
2014.
Okay.
I'm good. And
Obama basically stood back on that one, and just basically let that one happen for the most part. So the issue is, how far is this guy going to go? I think that, just to respond to that last part of your question, and we've made it very clear that if you go further and invade a NATO country, then that's going to probably bring a completely European war. I would guess.
Just to be clear, the agreement is between the U.S., UK, Russia, and Ukraine. The Budapest memorandum, was that how you?
That was in like 1994 after Yugoslavia, where they like kind of amended the NATO agreement, stating specifically that Ukraine would not join NATO. Is that what you're talking about?
No, that was Ukraine giving up their nuclear weapons for an agreement between Russia, United States, and the UK that Russia would not invade them after they had given up the armaments.
Right. Gave them back to
Right.
Russia.
Yeah, because at the time, when Ukraine split off, Ukraine had the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world.
Yeah.
The United States had one, Russia had two, and Ukraine was number three. And Ukraine ended up giving their nukes away in agreement that they would be protected, but also that Russia wouldn't come and invade them in the future.
I'm going
Let,
to go ahead.
let me respond to part A on John. Okay.
Okay,
Real
please.
quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Number one, the oil and gas embargo. The thing that's important for us to remember, John, and our audience, is that if we completely cut off oil and gas from Russia, who's going to be affected the most? It's certainly not going to be the United States. It's going to be Europe. They have created a dependency with Russia, probably an unhealthy dependence on their energy. And there's even talk now that they're going to have to work on that to make sure they don't get themselves put in this position in any other situation. But I think it's really critical to recognize that it's easier said to say, well, if we totally cut them off, we would really bring them to their knees. And I agree with that concept, but I think Europe would suffer tremendously if that happened. So that's why they're hedging on their bets. At least that's the way I see it. Number two, diplomats out. Couldn't agree with you more. Number three, the SWIFT banking system. I think they're doing that. Hopefully they continue to enact further restrictions, but I know they've started it. Number four, a no-fly zone over Ukraine. I don't think that's possible, but there is, the European Union has enacted a no-fly zone for Russian planes over all of Europe. If they just enacted that, as I understand it. So that's going to do part of that, although that's aimed more at the financial aspect of the Russian economy than the military aspect. Whether they can enact a no-fly zone over another country, I don't know. Or I don't know. That's a tricky one. And then the countries that aren't supporting the sanctions, believe it or not, China postured in the very beginning, basically saying, you know what, we're not siding with Russia, but we think the Americans are the instigators here. But I think 2 days ago, they actually stopped refusing Russian currency, which was a big deal, and stopped offering money to the Russians for loans and that kind of thing. So even though the Chinese are buds with, somewhat buds, they're odd bedfellows, I think, more than anything, is the way I would describe it. They have done a couple of things and not shown the support that I think some of the experts are saying they expected China to show. And then one other thing that I read was interesting. They're thinking that China and Putin had made a deal that no attack until the Olympics are over. That makes sense, doesn't it? So anyway, not disagreeing with anything you're saying, John, just kind of another slant on it. But I like what you have to say. I really do.
Mike, I had one question before we moved on, and I wanted to say another thing. But when you said China support, you're saying that China didn't support America the way that they thought, or
Russia.
Right. And I mean, it does. I think with this, Ukraine thing kind of coming off, I don't know if anybody else saw that China is like flying over Taiwan's no-fly zones as like an act of defiance as well. Which would maybe, show, which it might be some sort of show of support of Russia being like, we're both kind of creating geopolitical headaches right now.
Well, and of course, people are looking at what's going on in Ukraine as the first installment of, okay, what's America's response going to be if China decides to take over Taiwan? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the same issue there.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to say, I got that, normally the opposition to Russia's involvement in Ukraine, because there's definitely a long history there. I mean, I know a couple of people from Ukraine who they feel Russian and all that other different stuff. I don't want to that's obviously anecdotal, but there was the reason for containing the USSR at that point was a strategy of containing communism. I mean, Russia is a capitalist oligarchy now, so I don't understand where the same determination in order to kind of contain them would make sense through NATO. And, NATO kind of went off its mission when it was used to fight in the Middle East with Iraq and George Bush in 2003. That's just.
Not if they saw it as a worldwide problem.
But yeah, but that's not a worldwide, committee. It's like a North Atlantic issue that was devised for a specific issue, and they kind of expanded their scope. It was just like a point that was brought up.
Well, Canada's in there as well. Canada's also one of the main countries. And the other thing that China did, I think just yesterday, there was a UN resolution and they did not veto it. Russia was the only country that vetoed it. So little things like that don't seem like they mean much, but I think Russia was expecting China to be more supportive. And China's, seems to be walking a tightrope, which is okay. And I'm glad that they're not fully throating support for Russia and their right to do what they're doing in Ukraine.
I would disagree with that, Mike, just on two main issues. Number one is that during the Olympics, when Putin and Xi Jinping met, they announced a new multi-billion-dollar deal where China is paying for Russian energy, for gas and coal and petroleum. So a lot of that financing that Russia will need for the future is coming from China. Number two, our State Department made a massive, in my opinion, massive blunder, because they went to China with intelligence about Russia massing forces on Ukraine and asked China for help in dissuading Russia from having the invasion. And China actually turned around and ended up giving the data that US had given them to Russia. So they shared that information, that intelligence piece. Basically everything that we shared with China went to Russia. And I think they absolutely want to help Russia, because the more that we are involved with everybody else, the less we can focus on them. And then the easier it would be for them to expand into Southeast Asia, whether it's Taiwan or Indonesia or all of these other countries. I think China absolutely has a stake in the game so that they can expand. China is in very bad shape economically for a couple different reasons. And if they can go out and expand, if they can get Taiwan and take the income that small country brings in, that's a massive boon to them. Just the same way that it's a massive boon to Russia to take Ukraine because of the natural resources, because of the pipeline and the other things like that will increase their wealth. And not only that, but Russia is getting a large amount of boost in income because oil prices are going up because they are invading. So anytime you have that world instability, the price of oil goes up, and we're at what are we at, 110 right now? I'm probably
it came
wrong
down.
on that, but
it came down the last couple of days. It came down a little bit.
So it may be at like 100 then now or something like that.
Yeah.
So it wherever it happens to be, if it goes up, then they get more money for the oil that they're producing. And in those two cases, especially, if we could separate those two countries, if there was something that we could do to separate the mutual benefit between them, I would want to do that in a heartbeat. I don't know that there is. I'm not sure that anybody knows any way to do that.
It's I mean, with how we've had two extremely different administrations, from former President Trump to current President Biden, and even from former President Obama, that, I mean, there's been no consistency in our country to try to work on a stable relationship, to try to separate their mutual needing of each other. So I don't think so.
Well, the thing is, they're not natural allies.
No,
they for a long time they were not on friendly terms for a lot of different reasons, and they're not. But they both are seeing a mutual benefit right now.
Of course.
Are you talking about Ukraine and Russia?
We're talking about China.
Russia and China.
Oh, they are not natural, right? Not natural friends. I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, maybe the whole, enemy of your enemy is your friend, but yeah, definitely not
well,
best.
yeah, and the thing is, we need to have that link with China.
One of them.
You
Well,
know,
that's kind of the
especially
link that
since
we have with China, with like we have like a mutual destruction pact with Russia, and then we have like a mutual economic pact with China, kind of.
some of the things that I've been hearing is why Russia has felt emboldened to do this was our withdrawal and how we looked out of Afghanistan. Was that a fair? You're nodding your head, John. Would you like to kind of go on with that? Do you think that's a fair representation of that because of how we withdrew from Afghanistan that emboldened Russia? Why?
I think that would embolden any of our enemies. So right off the bat, think about those press conferences that Biden and Blinken and I can't remember Secretary of Defense's name right now. But remember how we were talking about how many people were left behind and things like what can we do to go back in there and get them? And our leaders and I can't remember the general's name. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on all these names. But we kept getting from these press conferences, we don't have the ability to go in there. We can't do this. We're not doing this. We don't do this. We had senators setting up volunteers on both sides, senators and Republican and Democrat, setting up volunteer people in their offices to take over cases to gather information because people were emailing them saying, hey, I'm still stuck over here. We had a Senate report that came out, what was it, 2 weeks ago from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a part of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, if we're precise, saying that we didn't leave 150, we didn't leave 200, that we most likely left 9,000 people behind back there. And for us to stand up and say, we can't get these people out, we can't do this, we can't do that, when literally these people were the Afghan and the Taliban army at that point, we're so far beyond them, we couldn't go back in and do anything.
What's
That
the connection?
absolutely has to embolden the enemies, saying, look, these guys can't even fight the Afghans. How are they ever going to fight us?
No one could fight the Afghans. Russians couldn't fight the Afghans. I mean, Afghanistan's have persevered through many great, like the Russians, us.
We absolutely had them in check. During the Trump administration, we had them in check. We weren't having deaths. We weren't having attacks.
The Taliban?
Yeah.
You're talking
the
about?
Taliban. Yeah. I'm not talking about that we were running. I'm not talking about we were running the country or the guy that was there was a good guy or anything like that. I'm saying they were not attacking our people. At least when we made that deal with whatever his face, I'm losing my mind on these names.
With the Taliban, right?
Yeah, when we threatened to glass house the Taliban leader's hometown.
Okay, it's my understanding, or I should ask you your understanding. Trump negotiated the deal with the Taliban to get out by May 1, 2021. Yes?
He
Or no?
negotiated that deal and they broke the deal. And that's why he ended up launching that missile strike.
Against that one guy? Or against that?
No, not against Soleimani. That's a different deal, but against the Taliban.
No. Right.
And once that deal was broken, no one should have gone back and tried to hold us to that deal again.
Okay, and part of the deal was that they were going to free 5,000 imprisoned Taliban soldiers. Yes? That's part of the deal. And the Afghanistan government said, wait a minute, you can't make that. You can't force us to release these prisoners. And
I'm not
the United
aware of
States,
that part of the deal. I'm not saying
that's
you're
part
wrong. I just don't know about it.
okay. And the United States put pressure on them. So they started releasing 150 Taliban a day over a period of time. And then during that time, they were still talking. There was violence. They broke the deal. And that's when that missile strike hit. Okay. So there was violence all through that entire time. But Trump brokered the deal.
Trump brokered the deal. The deal was broken. We went in and attacked the Taliban. The Taliban backed off. That's why I'm saying we had them in check, because we didn't have any of our soldiers attacked for 18 months. That was the longest time that we went without having any deaths.
Okay, but one of the things that kind of that disturbs me about the description, I think Sean said it best on getting out of Afghanistan. Biden was dealt a bad hand and he played it poorly. That's the way I look at that. He did. He played it shitty. He did a bad job of it. He turned it into another Hanoi, no doubt about it. Okay, but the original deal wasn't his. Okay,
The original deal was
the
broken,
timeline
so
was set
there
up by
was no
Trump.
deal anymore.
Well, they had
Yeah.
a timeline. They had a timeline, and Biden extended the timeline from May to what was it, August or September? I'm not sure what the date was, but he extended it like 4 months to give us more time to get more people out.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it doesn't matter as much. I get what you're saying. I mean, it doesn't matter as much like whose fault. It's like if there was weakness shown, and that is emboldening Russia and China now in this situation. Whose fault the weakness was doesn't really matter at this
Well,
point. I get
wanted-
what you guys are saying.
I want to see. Okay, so another statement was due to Nancy Pelosi and Schiff. How you pronounce his last name? Adam Schiff.
Adam Schiff.
Impeachment of former President Trump that weakened Ukraine, which allowed this to happen. You think that's a fair statement to make?
You talking to me?
In general, to anyone?
I don't see
Impeaching
why.
Trump would hurt Ukraine.
Yeah. A senator out of Wisconsin.
Oh, it didn't allow Trump to concentrate and really end the war and maybe bring the guys home early and not let the
Not for
Taliban
you-
break the promise.
Not
or
for
something like that.
Afghanistan, for Ukraine.
I don't get the link
Senator
myself.
Ron Johnson blames Pelosi and Adam Schiff for weakening Ukraine with Trump's impeachment.
That's grandstanding.
That makes sense.
There can be some truth to that. I don't know how extensive that is, but I can tell you, looking back at that thing, they impeached him over the phone call to Ukraine. In that time, we were talking about sending over arms to Ukraine. We did send some, but we didn't send everything that we actually had promised at that time. So if you want to say that impeachment is the thing that halted the arms from going over there, then I can understand that tie going there, because we sent 1 out of 4 shipments, if I'm remembering right.
And this was the charge
phone-
was, the claim was that Trump had said, to get our cooperation, you need to help us spy on the Biden family. That was the charge.
That was what Schiff had said
Yeah, that's what the
when
charge
he was reading a fake transcript, which he lied about.
Okay, well, that was the initial charge. But then there was also some circumstantial evidence that there actually was no, the deal didn't go through until there was another discussion, and then all of a sudden the deal went through, as I understand it. But you know what? We're kind of off topic. I think I don't want to get too crazy with that. So
I'm just because these are the mixed signals that I'm hearing from our news media about this situation with Ukraine and I almost called it the Union and Russia.
It's been difficult for a lot of the hardcore Republicans to be super critical, because it's tough to be super critical of Biden without sounding like you're supporting Putin. And
Right.
we've only had a couple of our major leaders come out and say that Putin's a great leader and a smart strategist out of the whole thing. Most of them have kind of walked a finer line on that, but there's been lots of blame to go around, including, if we didn't cut all of our oil supplies and gas supplies, we'd be able to take care of them ourselves. I heard that one. One senator said, I don't give a rat's ass about Ukraine. I care about my own border.
That's what Kevin said.
That's what Kevin said.
Yeah. Well, he was talking,
Is that what you said, Kevin?
Well,
no, you didn't say that.
kind of.
But
So,
we know that it is important for us to pay attention to Ukraine, right? We should care about Ukraine and what happens there, right? Or
Yes, I totally agree. It's a humanitarian thing now, especially with Russia going in.
I would say this is very reminiscent of 1930s Germany. That speech that Vladimir Putin put out about the Blas areas, where they're saying, well, these people are ethnically Russian and they speak
Yeah.
Russian and they do
Our
blah blah
ancestor.
blah. That's almost word for word what Hitler said about the Rhinelands and the Saarlands when he took those over and basically tried to annex them right before the meeting with Neville Chamberlain. That, I mean, you could literally switch a few words around, and the premise there was the same. And this guy is talking about not just going back to the Soviet Union, but that crazy. And this is one of the few times that I'll recommend nobody read this, but that crazy 5,000 page thing that he put out about how he wants to return Russia to the to greater than
Yeah.
Peter the Great's standing to the old Russian Empire. That is insanity. That should be up there with Mein Kampf from Hitler. I mean, that's, I think somebody else said this. I don't remember who on the panel said this earlier, but he's not going to stop at Ukraine. That's a first step in conquering a lot of other places.
That's exactly what Mike said. Mike said,
Yeah. That's
know,
the concern.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the concern. That's why we have to show force to our friends, to the countries that are in NATO, to say, hey, man, we're going to be there with you. We're not going to just, oh, well, we'll let this one go.
Mhm.
You know,
Well,
can't.
I think there's like an issue of like international law, and not even just, you know, the NATO treaties that were in place, but I mean there's the argument that's made that we interfere in other people's elections. I mean, I think even John was alluding to like the 2014 coup that went on in Ukraine specifically. From what I understand, it was like there was a guy, Yanukovych.
Anything like that, John?
I don't remember talking about that at all. Sorry.
No, you were going, well, what should we do now? You know, based on right now, what's happening or how we got here. So I assume that you were kind of alluding to how we got here was the 2014 coup in the country, that, you know, it seems to kind of be the conventional wisdom as like really the turning point of where things really started heating up to where we got here. Unless I might have been mistaken. I might have, you know, assumed, but either way,
Here's something
the you know, from my standpoint or whatever, you know, there's definitely a lot of different aspects to this thing. Like you're saying, I mean, there's like the energy pipeline aspect. There's this coup in 2014. There was this guy Yanukovych that was kind of like a 50-50 guy who was just trying to keep the peace. And he was like violently overthrown, and a new government was installed that was very pro EU in the West, and was
That's when
willing to
that's when the current guy got in. That's when he was an actor, right? Is that what you're talking about? That guy?
that happened like 3 years later, I think. There was a violent overthrow in 2014. A pro-West regime was installed, and then the actor essentially was elected after him, who was kind of on the same side, as far as I understand, in terms of leaning more towards the EU and NATO rather than Russia, which was not sitting well based on the current international law.
Quick question, Kevin. Do you have any
Sure.
Russian ties?
I mean, I like Habib Nurmagomedov.
Well, he's not Russian, but okay. Just wanted to make sure.
I know I am a secret Russian for sure.
Here's something.
Okay, so I actually want to play something from sorry if I butcher your name. Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah.
I want to play this real quick.
Oh, I heard this.
Here it says, hey,
I heard she was an Assad apologist.
You are not going to hear on the mainstream media. What you do hear is warmongers arguing that we must protect Ukraine because it is a quote unquote democracy. But they're lying. Ukraine isn't actually a democracy. For example, to hold on to power, Ukraine's president shut down the 3 TV stations that were openly criticizing him and his policies, imprisoned the head of the opposition political party that had come in second place in their elections, and went and arrested and jailed that party's leaders. This is exactly what Putin has been accused of doing. But Ukraine did this all with the support of the United States. Now, here's something you're
The guy that got arrested, by the way, is Putin is his daughter's godfather.
Okay, I just have a question. What election was the guy arrested in? Was that the 2017 or 2018 election?
I'll go
I
ahead.
think it was after that. He was the opposition party. He was pro-Russian.
Mhm.
And what she said, there were 3 TV stations that were closed down. He was arrested on corruption charges, is what he was arrested on. But her claim is not so far off from what I understand has happened in Ukraine. So the way I look at it, it's a burgeoning democracy. They're struggling, coming from a corrupt state. It's going to take some time, but that's irrelevant to me in terms of what, like John mentioned just a minute ago, what Putin's end game is. His end game. I mean, he talked. One of the earlier demands for getting out of for not attacking was to push NATO back to 1994 territorial levels. And which would have expanded, Russia's sphere way further than it currently is. The Baltic states would be gone. So that's fairly common.
Well, I'm not saying that Russia does have this right, but I just don't I think what they're trying to bait the US into is on the world stage saying you don't have the right to secure your, national security the way you see fit, but we do. When you think about it, it's like Ukraine borders Russia. It's, 8,000 miles away from the United States. We're not really, we don't have.
Like, I mean, at one point, can the Ukrainians say, hey, dude, I don't want to be your guys' pawn. I want to be my own thing. I mean, do they never get that right? Do those people never have those freedoms?
I don't think there really is that option. I mean, not even between the
That sounds
US and
crazy,
Russia,
you
it's
just said.
either NATO or Russia.
But they said they want to join NATO because of all the aggression that Russia's been showing, annexing Crimea. Like, wouldn't you be like, again, the people turned on, the Ukrainian people said, we don't want nothing to do with Russia no more. And that happened throughout these years from 20 to today.
I don't think that it was as cut and dry as you're saying, Chris. I mean, I think that there's, there was definitely a split in the population. I don't really know exactly how it was, but
there are two regions. The 2 regions that were still pro within Ukraine were still pro-Russian. Okay. And they've been fighting those fights, but for the most part, Russia came in and said, hey, these are still Russia. But one of the things that I learned after doing some research and just listening to what's going on after Crimea, a lot of Ukrainians started to nationalize a lot more. They became, I've heard musicians and authors who used to write and sing in Russian no longer did and started singing in Ukrainian and writing in Ukrainian. So it became one of those things that it kind of brought the country together.
Cultural movement to unify as Ukrainians, native Ukrainian instead of Russian.
Right. So I think while it is a shaky democracy, I totally agree. We can't sit there and say, hey man, it's this democracy we got to protect. It's shaky. There's no doubt about it. But it appears as if the people want to lean toward the European Union rather than a Russian sphere of influence. That's certainly the way I see it.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's definitely that faction, and that's where I guess the solution they're saying is, well, then let's split it up then. The side that wants to go there can go there, but these 2 are recognized countries because the population is the majority the other way. And, I'm just saying, it seems to be, it's just like border disputes that has been going on for hundreds of years in Europe. I don't know why America, it's like in order to like take it away from Russia, or you can't have that. There's some way that it's like that the US has something to gain where it's like it's its owner from that standpoint. You know what I'm saying? Like you're kind of saying that by not allowing, the borders to, go whatever way that they're going to go. Unless
So
Well-
we have that agreement with Ukraine, with Russia, and the UK, saying that we wouldn't let it happen. And then if you decide that you want to wipe that out because it's an old agreement or because it doesn't apply anymore, then you still have to look at the premise of what Putin is basically planning here. And you can look, because he's written all this stuff out. You can go and you can watch those 2 speeches that he gave, where he talks about returning Russia to its glory days, where Ukraine is not not the last stop. And once you realize that, then we have to decide, okay, if it's not the last stop, where do we draw the line? Do we draw the line at Hungary? Do we draw the line at Poland? Do we draw the line at Czechoslovakia? Do we draw the line once he gets to the UK?
Aren't they all
Because
native?
in the past, when we had World War I, we had nothing to do with Franz Ferdinand getting shot, but yet
Right.
that ended up through multiple events. We ended up getting involved in World War I. We had nothing to do with Germany invading the Rhinelands or in going into Czechoslovakia, and we stayed out of that for as long as we did. But yet that came to us when we were bombed in Pearl Harbor. Wars don't. I know the other people have said this, and I'm not taking credit for this, but war doesn't start in Lawrence, Kansas. War starts somewhere else and then works its way toward us. And
You're
if we
making
don't
the-
stop it there, then we fight it here. And
Yeah, you're
I
making the-
believe that's a big part of this thing. But again, I'm not for, hey, let's throw 1 million tanks over there. Let's throw our soldiers over there. Let's do everything that we can to stop it where it is now without sacrificing American blood, so that we don't have a repeat of all these things. In worst case scenario, we don't have another world war or something like that.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
Wait, I didn't actually understand that. You're saying do what we can short of putting troops in there?
Economic sanctions, doing,
Yeah.
Right
supporting
now,
our-
we do not have to put soldiers over there to stop this. There is absolutely still time to stop Russia in its tracks without putting American blood on the ground over there.
If the economic sanctions don't work, just for the sake of argument, what's your next plan?
The same 5 things I went over at the beginning of this thing.
Oh, I'm saying if that doesn't work, the no-fly zone, all these other different things. I mean,
That will work.
when push comes to shove, would you put soldiers on to protect Ukraine? Me personally, I wouldn't. I would
No.
just be like, I guess
No,
Ukraine
No, I
is
would
part of
not.
Russia now.
I would not. No.
Okay, I was just curious.
But again, Russia's apparently stockpiled a bunch of money and a bunch of resources to protect against sanctions, because they've been sanctioned before, from what I'm understanding. But
Yeah.
Again, if those monies are going to go to prop up an economy that's going to get hit hard, their stock market went down almost a half the first day, and then settled back up to losing 34% in one day.
Are you talking
So
about
that-
Ukraine or Russia?
No, Russia's stock market.
Okay.
So that's a
Yeah.
lot of money.
That was
That's
Russia's
a lot.
market.
Yeah, a lot of money out the door right there. So again, no fly zone. In other words, Russians, where are they going to fly to? Where are the Russian people going to fly to? So so the airline industry goes kaput. I mean, it just has to happen in these countries. And again, it's tough to ask European countries to bear a greater share of the burden, although obviously they're a greater threat to them.
Right.
But,
They're in
you know,
greater danger also.
Yes, yeah, but Germany, I guess, is very dependent on gas and oil, and if things, and they've already gone further than I thought they would go, because Germany in the beginning of this was kind of a holdout and saying, we have fairly decent ties with Russia and we're going to deal with them ourselves. But as soon as the attack came, they really got tough, and they actually decided to send arms to Ukraine, which for Germany is a pretty big deal. So I'm seeing some strong support, and I got to say, maybe John will disagree with me on this one, but the first thing Biden did when this started to become an issue was to say we're not going to put troops in Ukraine. Smart move. The second thing he did was he started to get his ducks in a row in Europe. And I think spent a lot of time going from country to country to country to country saying, hey, man, the only way we're going to do this is to stick together, and we've got to slap this asshole, and we got to slap him hard, or else it's not going to work. And it sounds like there's a pretty strong coalition of people who are willing to, or countries that are willing to, to go along with this. And like John says, I totally agree. If they can do that, then they can stop Russia in its tracks. If they can't, then he's going to continue to push the envelope until something serious happens.
Does anybody know the percentage of Russians who agree or disagree with what Putin is doing? Because I know there's a lot of protests going on out there.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. Those protests are being squashed immediately. Thank you, Anderson, for asking that question, because that leads to our second topic. With all the talk we heard about Canadians Prime Minister Trudeau being I've heard some people say dictator or a tyrant. And after what we've seen from Russia's president, Putin, do we still feel comfortable feeling that Trudeau is a tyrant?
He hasn't invaded the United States yet, so I will say no.
And he allowed those truckers to be blocking commerce for quite a while as well, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
He should have swiftly acted on that like Russia did.
You think, John? I'm very interested.
Just because he's a baby dictator doesn't make him any less of a dictator.
Well,
I mean, here's the
think
thing.
it is-
You want a clear and simple description of a dictator?
Yes, sir.
It's someone who takes the freedom away from their people. When you have a person who is emergency what is it? Emergency Powers Act, sorry. When that was instituted, what were they doing? They were seizing people's bank accounts, basically taking their money. They were seizing people's property. You can go on there and you can see the Ottawa mayor talking about how under the Emergencies Act, they seized these truckers' vehicles and basically are planning to sell them. So not give them back after the protest. They're just stripping them of those things. That's their entire livelihood. And some of those guys and gals, that's where they live, is in that truck. They were going so far as to literally, if they had pets in the truck, they were taking the pets and putting them into shelters, telling the drivers that you couldn't get those back. All of these kind of things, you can't say, oh, this guy is a good guy. This guy is leading the right way. His deputy prime minister, the day before they announced the recession of those things, said that we are in the process of making some of these permanent. So they are not only seizing assets, not only seizing bank accounts, but seizing property, physical property from people and just stripping them of it. That is absolutely a dictatorship. And the only reason that I can see that he said, oh, the emergency is now over, is because the massive run on the banks, people going and taking their money out, foreign investors going and taking their money out. And if you take a look at the 2 days after he announced that Emergency Powers Act, and take a look at how many banks had to go offline so that people couldn't pull their money out. So people were physically going down to the bank and taking their money out. And then people were working through intermediaries to take their money out. That's, as far as I can tell, that's the only reason they backed off, is because they were losing a massive amount of money and they were ready for a market crash, in particular because of that. I mean, how can you not say that's a tyrant?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with John. This is one of the biggest, moves against civil liberties that I can remember. The ability to freeze your bank account based on political action. Usually you just go to jail for a little bit, and then there's, the legal system. This is it's cruel and unusual punishment at this point.
And the scary thing is that they have a Declaration of Rights. They don't have a Bill of Rights like we do, but the number one thing on the Declaration of Rights is that the government can inhibit the rights that are listed after after number one, because number one basically says we can inhibit these rights if there's an emergency. So they can basically take away all of the rights that those people have based on their desire to have something categorized as an emergency.
To be fair, we also can suspend people's rights in the event of an emergency. I think we talked about that. There was at least the Japanese internment in 1942. They can do it to them. They can do it to anybody else.
Which was a disaster and was unconstitutional and was terrible. We had, again, that goes back to bad judges. That went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically just stabbed us all with that decision. I mean, they've done it a couple of times, but that was one of the worst decisions that we've had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm just saying, going from Canada doesn't, they're able to suspend XYZ. I just wanted to kind of make it clear we also can and have, we're in the same boat.
Debate.
Right. We weren't supposed to.
Well,
it isn't written into our law saying that we can, like it is in theirs.
Well, if you do it, it doesn't matter if it's legal or not, right? If you do it and get away with it, it doesn't matter if it's legal or not. It's essentially legal.
Mike, you're going to
what I'm going to say is I'm sorry, but I'm woefully ignorant on this subject. I've heard about it, but I haven't done much research on it. So this is, there must be two parts to it. The trucking part is one part of it, and there must be, John, you must be referring to the COVID part, where if they don't get vaccination, the government can come in and do things. So I'm sorry, can you explain a little bit better? Because maybe there's some ignorant audience members out there as well that need to know that.
So the trucker protest was based on two things. Number one was the mandates, which they say should have been lifted by now. But one of the things that really started the war against the mandate was that if you drive a truck and you went across the border, which a lot of them do, they do the transcontinental route there. When you came back, you still, even though you had the vaccine, you still had to go and wait in their holding center for 2 weeks after that. That was probably the straw that broke the camel's back, if you want to count it that way. There's been other freedoms that have been taken away from them, but the trucker convoy starts, they basically occupy parts of Ottawa. Now, here's the thing. They were not allowed to be in front of the Capitol in Ottawa. Where they were allowed to be was in several different parts that were around Ottawa. And in one, probably the big one, was that they went and blockaded the bridge that goes from, I don't remember the province, but the one that comes across into Michigan, because that's a main transport way between the two. And the protests at that point, my opinion is that Trudeau thought they were getting out of control and then decided to put in the Emergency Powers Act. And that is what they used to enable themselves to go and get the banking records from people through their banking system, because they do have a program that does provide national data to the government.
Okay, of Americans or of Canadians?
Of anyone who has money in Canadian banking accounts. So if you're an American that has money in a Canadian bank, and I'm just going to make up a name because I don't know if this is real, but let's say I have money in the First Bank of Canada, then my assets can be freezed if they think that I am supporting the Freedom Convoy. And they can basically seize that money and take it away.
And from what I understand, I don't think they actually need to give the proof. They can freeze the assets and then try to come up with proof after the fact.
They can freeze the asset based on suspicion, and then however long that takes, or they can just flat out take it away.
And Mike, so the truckers did start out, it was like a vaccine mandate, but it is definitely way bigger than that from what I understand. I mean, 90% of the truckers were vaccinated. It wasn't really
began to grow and grow. Yeah.
Yeah. It's it wasn't that they were against vaccines or whatever the whole situation. From what I understand, that population versus a lot of other populations in the world were highly vaccinated. It was more of you're not allowed to do mandates. I don't really care what you're mandating. And then also, like John was saying, there was a lot of economic pressures from the having to wait 2 weeks every time you come over the border. It was more of like a union dispute in terms of they were trying to negotiate, some sort of, solution because a lot of these truckers, they're owner operators. If they have to sit out for 2 weeks, that's on them, money wise. So it turned into a good old like labor economic dispute rather than a vaccine dispute specifically.
And let me add one other thing. When Trudeau enacted the Emergency Powers Act, that still came up for a vote in the Parliament. What they have a vote of confidence, which basically means the Parliament could have overridden that decision at that time. And they did not. The Parliament ended up actually voting something to the effect of 185 to 134 to sustain the Emergency Powers Act. So I don't want to say that Trudeau was the only one responsible, because slightly more than half of the Parliament voted for it as well.
It is a democracy. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, he's not able to enact it by himself. I don't know.
I'll tell you what, I just want to tell the audience, I truly believe that We Could Be Wrong is more balanced and fair than Fox News, CNN, and any other major outlet. I'll tell you that right now. We are truly balanced and fair here.
Okay, and I'm reading an article about, trucker protest strands beef shipments at the U.S.-Canadian border, and there's a crossing between Montana and Canada. So, but those were actions by U.S. truckers, correct? And they were protesting the vaccine mandates, I'm assuming.
I think that one was started on our side.
Okay.
Well, from what I understand, also there was a plan from the Canadian truckers to go to the Super Bowl, and when that kind of got out, apparently Joe Biden called Justin Trudeau and was like, "Shut this down. We don't want this kind of coming over this way." And there is some accusations like that was kind of the pressure that forced his hand to move towards the emergency, the emergency guidelines that he's going through or whatever. But is
because of Biden? Because of Biden?
There is that accusation that because they were like threatening kind of to come down to the Super Bowl, once it was like, oh, this Canadian thing is going to start spreading to America, there were some back channels politically to shut this.
I'll tell you what,
which may explain kind of the overreaction, but also the significance here is that once a protest can get effective, they are really creating avenues to really shut it down, which will leave all protests ineffective moving forward.
I'll tell you what, no one wants to mess with the Super Bowl here. I mean, any truckers from any country want to come mess with the Super Bowl here. That's some serious trouble. That's
especially in LA, right?
Well, no, not even in LA. Like the Super Bowl is like pretty much like a holiday over here. You don't. That's
especially
like messing with our apple pie.
Yeah,
That's
you don't want to fuck. You don't want to fuck around with Cincinnati Bengals fans.
Yeah.
Right?
No. Thank you very much, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. That is our show for the day. Thank you for listening to We Could Be Wrong, but Who Cares? Thank you to our YouTube watchers and Instagram watchers. Thank you, guys. You're helping us grow. Good night, everyone, and I'll see you next week.
We are out.
Oh.
Okay, let me go here.
Good show, gentlemen.
Great show, guys. Great show. Wow.
Sorry for being
God.
cranky last week. I was like working all last fucking weekend and shit. I was just all cranky.
John, you were on fire today.
Yeah,
Hands down, one of your strongest shows ever. Like, I was like, yeah, let's see what John has to say. Next thing I know, I was like all big-eyed, eyes glazing over as this guy gave you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You were Google Gaga over John.
Yeah, I mean, really.
You got a
strong. Oh,
You got a 5-point plan? Maybe you're gonna solve this whole thing? I don't know.
hey, seriously, in all seriousness, that was super strong. I was like, really, I was like, wow, man, this guy is